Welcome to Coastal Voices, the show that brings you stories about life on Hatteras Island. This is Susan West, your host for the evening. The stories you'll hear tonight capture the spirit of people from Rodanthe to Hatteras Village. The storytellers come from all walks of life, and topics include everything from childhood memories to fish tales, community traditions to big storms, hard work to daring adventures. The stories are from recordings collected by local volunteers in the Coastal Voices Oral History Project. You'll meet some of those volunteers in the show tonight. To learn more about the project, please visit our website at carolinacoastalvoices.com.
Bruce Pritchard, a resident of Buxton, North Carolina since 2001, discusses how he and his wife Betty are the volunteer caretakers of an old family cemetery, which happens to be located in his front yard. Bruce mentions during the interview Danny Couch, who is the local historian. The interview took place February of 2014 with Sandy Jones Garrison. You have the honor of being the caretaker of the cemetery that's in your front yard.
When we bought the lot, this was an abandoned, overgrown cemetery. You didn't know it was there. I mean, people knew it was there, but you couldn't see it. And we just took it upon ourselves. Where we come from, Cape May is a very historical town, and we appreciate history. That was one of the reasons that we sort of volunteered to be caretakers, and we cleaned it up and fenced it off. And
so you put the fence around it?
Yeah.
And then, so then you went in and cleared it out, exposed the tombstone markers. Mm-hmm. Are they like a concrete material?
Granite, whatever they make.
They were granite?
Yeah.
And you could still see names inscribed on the tombstones?
Mm-hmm. There are other tombstones. They used to make them out of cedar. Well, over time they dissolve away. You can still see one on the other property next to us.
It's a cedar marker that you know that somebody is underneath there. Mm-hmm. Do you think that all the remains have been identified in this cemetery?
Quite sure not.
Okay. Do you ever see family members come by to visit?
Not really. Every once in a while Danny brings some people around.
That they think that their ancestors are buried there.
Right. Danny, when I'll see Danny pull up with people, I say, oh boy. And I'll go out because Danny starts telling stories, and I've learned a lot.
Do you know why this area was marked as the graveyard?
Probably high ground.
And whoever owned it must have given permission, or?
Well, these all used to be big plots of land. Family plots. Everybody intermarried, the Pharaohs and the Barnetts, and I think I told you this. Do you know the name of the street?
Well, the name of the street you live on is Flowers Ridge.
Right. Now most people assume it's because it's obviously a ridge, so it's high ground. And people assume there were flowers on it. No, there was a family named Flowers.
So it's named after a family.
Yes. I think there's a Polly Flowers is probably buried in here someplace. She married into I forget the Barnetts or the Pharaohs.
So really, this is a family cemetery. It wasn't really a public cemetery.
Actually,
it's a family.
most of the cemeteries you see are family cemeteries.
Are family cemeteries. That says a lot about you and Betty taking care of that cemetery. Do you think there are ghost stories attached to that, or?
There is a ghost story attached to it. There's the ghost of Flowers Ridge, the fiddler of Flowers Ridge Road. People would come down the road and they would hear fiddle playing. And they could never find out where it came from. They don't know who it was, but they think it's a ghost, and this is the only graveyard on the street, on this road, so they think that the Fiddler of Flowers Ridge is one of these guys. Never heard it.
Well, what do you think it is? Do you think it's a true ghost story?
I think it's an urban legend that got passed down.
Yeah. Elizabeth Browning Fox discusses the Williams-Burris lineage during the Civil War era. Liz was interviewed February 12, 2014 by Sandy Jones Garrison. We do have the lineage on Hatteras down pretty well from once they get here. We know who they are, and there are a few disagreements, but there were a whole lot of family Bibles. So you go forward to the latter 1800s. Now, all of the old families, the same names are still down here, with the exception of just a few. Few names have been lost, and that's probably because they must have had a slew of girls, and the family names went to the husbands. The Williams family, they were originally from Kennequet. Bateman Williams came down here to Buxton to be an assistant lighthouse keeper at Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in 1860. His wife was Axa Maria, it's spelled Maria, but it's pronounced Mariah Scarborough. And they had 8 children. I think there were 4 girls and 4 boys. Bateman was assistant lighthouse keeper. There were 2, both of them were Williams, who were the assistants. And 1860 was an interesting time because we were, right at the very beginning of the unrest that became the Civil War. When the head lighthouse keeper got the order from the Confederacy to remove the light from the lighthouse, Bateman was there. He and the other Williams took care of a beacon that was out on Cape Point. There was a secondary lighthouse out there, and they just called it the Beacon. That was his primary job, was taking care of the beacon. But the lighthouse keeper, the main lighthouse keeper, had to leave the island because he had removed a navigational aid, and that was probably, I don't know what they'd call it, treason, or it was very much against the law, so he had to leave. Bateman Williams, however, had 8 children and a wife, and I think the assistant keeper quarters had been built then, so he had a place to live. He stayed here and was lighthouse keeper during the entire Civil War. He was never made a main keeper, and I can only guess that was because he had been a Confederate. He did sign to say that he was not going to fight the Union, but they brought in a good Union lighthouse keeper to be the head light keeper there. It must have been incredibly stressful. He died in 1866. He was only 45 years old. His wife, Axa Maria Scarborough Williams, was young. She was in her, I think she was in her early 30s. Even though she had had 8 children, she was still very young, and they didn't waste good women down here. Well, she remarried and outlived that second husband. Well, then she remarried again. She was the original cougar, I think, because she was 40, I think she was 45, and her third husband was 27, and he actually did outlive her. He was a fisherman. She didn't have children after her first husband died. She didn't have any more children. She was so well loved that when she died and her third husband's family buried her, the second husband's family came that night and dug her up and stole her and buried them in their family plot. Well, I think she eventually got back in the right place. She's buried right across from the entrance to Our Lady of the Seas in Buxton.
Sharon Peel Kennedy of Buxton talks about her father preparing traditional Hatteras Island dishes, including turtle hash and stewed sturgeon. Did your father cook?
My father was a fabulous cook. He was an absolute, he could stew a nickel and make it taste good. He knew how to put water, salt, and pepper into everything, and it tastes delicious. And he was very basic in his cooking. Garlic never went into a pot of anything he cooked, and I can promise you dill or nutmeg He was definite basic. The one thing I remember him making the most, he was a long haulman, which they would stay out for days to haul nets. And he would be at the galley cook at some points, and they would make these things called fried biscuits, where you'd make like bacon powder biscuits. Instead of baking them, he'd pat them out flat and put them on a medium hot cast iron skillet and fry cook them to where they would rise, and the crust on them was insane crunchy and salty and good. And when I'd hear that boat coming in, I'd run to go just get a piece of that fried biscuit. He was always making turtle hash. I helped him make it.
Okay,
They would back in the day when people did eat turtles, and I know it's not a popular thing to talk about, but they would quarter them, and 4 different families would get a quarter of that turtle, and then you would take and clean and dress it up, and then you'd put it cover it with water and a little onion, a little salt and pepper, and you'd cook it for probably 1 to 2 hours real slow, let it cool, and then you literally had to shred or pick the turtle meat real gentle to kind of separate it.
Okay.
Each piece, yeah, is like separating cotton, so to speak.
Okay.
And then when that was done, you put it back in the pot with some diced potatoes and diced onions, a little salt pork, and cover it with some more water.
So
Yeah.
what did it taste like?
Indescribably delicious.
A strong
No.
sea flavor?
No. No, it would taste like, a very delicious mild pork, chicken,
Okay.
seafoody flavor.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's been so long since I've had a nibble of one, I can't even remember. And what was hilarious about it is that the pot that you would make would probably be several gallon pot that you'd make, literally a huge pot, because when you picked it, it grew, it expanded.
Oh.
You know, a quarter of a turtle is pretty big to begin with.
I would guess so.
Yeah, and so when you pick it, it expanded it, and you cook it down more with your potatoes and stuff. Of course, you had to have fried cornbread to go along with it. And then if you didn't eat it all, which you usually couldn't, each day that you reheated it, it was better and better and better.
And so then you mentioned sturgeon stew.
Sturgeon.
Do you know how your dad made that?
Absolutely. He would take and get the sturgeon and clean it real good, get the inside, the cord out of the inside of it, and cut it into chunks, lightly flour it, and you would brown a little bit, take it out, and put some potatoes and onions in the pot, put your sturgeon back into it, and cook that for probably about an hour. Let everything let everything cook real slow. Oh my, it'd be like eating shrimp, lobster, scallops all together.
In an interview with John Griffin, Jim Mitchum of Hatteras describes how Manson Meekins of Avon helped Jim create an accurate map of Kinnikeet.
There's a fellow who still lives up in Kinnikeet today, and Manson Meekins is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met in my life. He's, 95, 96 years old now, and I've known him for years. He was a friend of my father-in-law, Lacey Austin, and he was telling me one time that he used to make maps when he was a youngster in the Coast Guard. And he's stationed up in New York, he's stationed in Philadelphia, he's stationed all over. And one of the ways he kept himself entertained was to think about home, and he'd do these little hand-drawn maps of Kinnikeet. Just keep in touch with the folks back home, and just things to bring his memory back to Kinnikeet and the place that he loved. And I was looking at all these maps that he'd had, and sat down with him on a couple of interviews I did with him a couple years ago with these old postal maps, and I went over with him. and asked him, there's places I'd heard about that didn't know where they were in or near Kennekeet. I'd ask Manson, where are the White Hills? And he'd look at the old map and he'd point it out. He said, right here. And I would mark it down on that map. I said, how about the Little Hills? It's right here. He'd point it out. I'd mark it on the map. And these are two little places that are just north of Little Kennekeet Station. And I'd ask him different questions like that. What about this place called Black Hammock? It was located right there in Kennekeet, just behind the Food Lion. He says, that's wrong. And I have to go by exactly what Manson's telling me. He knows what he's talking about. He knows this area so well. He says, the Black Hammock is actually located up in Kennekeet. I'm sorry, up in Salvo, in that area. And I break that map out, and he shows me where it is. And so Manson Meekins is a tower of knowledge, and I tried to record as much of it as I can from him, and that's what I'm basing my Avon map on today.
George Pratt, a longtime member of the Cape Hatteras Anglers Club, discusses the club's mission with Sandy Jones Garrison on June 16, 2014.
Well, it sponsors a fishing tournament. It raises money for scholarships and for other groups on the island. It gives money to the food programs, to the rescue service, to the fire departments, and any other charitable organization. They also give a lot of money to OBPA, which stands for Outer Banks Preservation Association. And one of their roles has always been to try to keep the beaches open. But they do a lot of fundraising. They have a fishing tournament every year that raises money. They have about 120 teams of 6 persons each come and fish. That's a popular event, usually in November. They have bingo. They have dinners and other things to raise money. We also used to have a partnership with the Park Service and offered a program called Fish with the Ranger, which I participated in for many years. And 2 days a week, we would meet with the ranger and have up to 35 participants that would sign up and go out on the beach, and we'd surf fish, usually with a weight and small hooks for small fish. A lot of kids, a lot of adults also. We provided the rods and reels and took them out. There's been some talk of attempting to reestablish that program. I hated to see it go because it gave us a relationship with the Park Service. We were part of the Park Service programs, and we actually had someone from the Park Service, a ranger, come and would stand there and fish and talk with the kids and the families. It was a nice program. When they closed all the beaches, the leadership of the Anglers Club felt that it was a little strange for us to promote a program when people couldn't utilize it or didn't have access to the beaches.
In an interview with Susan West, Dallas Miller talks about his mother's family moving from Little Kennekeet to Avon.
My family was from here. Her father, I don't remember because he died before I was born.
Okay.
But he was a commercial fisherman. In fact, he was fishing. He actually had pneumonia. Came in and really got really sick from what I remember them telling me. And sometime later passed away because of that. Now, my mother lived up at Little Kennekeet. She was the last one on Avon that lived up there. But her mother and grandmother, who I remember both of them very well, were up there because she said she was 6 years old when she moved from Little Kennekeet to Avon.
So
And
why did folks move from...
I don't know, unless they were just... There was only just a few families up there anyway. I don't think they had a store up there. There was no store. The school, my aunt taught in the school, and it seems like to me, my mom told me that school was actually in the church, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
So it was about 1919 when she moved down here. The house they lived in at Little Kennekeet is still standing here in Avon Village. It's up on North End Road where my mom used to live. It's behind that, behind her house. But they took that house apart in sections, put it on sailboats, and sailed it down to Avon to the creek that comes up at North End.
Wow.
I don't know how they got it from there, if it was horse and cart or what, to where it was, which is only probably 500 yards, and then put it together.
Melody Gray Schwartz talks about the years she crabbed and fished with other Hatteras Island women. Do you remember how many crab pots you set?
We had 150.
Okay.
It's a lot.
And
we pulled them by hand. We got very muscular.
Uh-huh.
My uncle told me I looked like a linebacker. Yeah, I have big shoulders and arms.
Where did you sell their crabs?
We sold it to Quality Seafood.
Okay.
Which is, I guess it's Michael Peel's now, place now.
Okay.
The guys picked on us so bad.
They did?
They didn't like us girls down there in their territory.
They didn't?
No, they didn't like us at all. They didn't take us serious. I think they thought we were just messing around. So we would go, remember one morning we got up early and we went down there and tried to start our motor, wouldn't start, and we pulled and pulled and pulled, and we were there early. We always tried to get out and get back real early because we had to go work at the restaurant.
Right.
We were still trying when the guys started showing up, and one of them came over and looked at our motor, and somebody had switched our spark plug wires.
Oh.
So they were always sabotaging us.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So one day somebody pulled our plug out.
Oh,
We went down there and our boat was sunk.
How long did you do the crabbing with Tricia then?
We did it a couple summers, and then I did it with Dawn. Tricia didn't want to do it anymore, and Dawn Austin and I did it together. And
was that the same boat and same number of crab pots? Do you remember?
Yeah.
And was she waitressing also?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were both waitressing in Atlantic View, and Hamilton and Justin were little boys.
Okay.
Let's see, how old were they? Probably about 4, maybe, and we would take them with us.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and one day we had our pots set on the other side of the reef, and we had a hard time finding Barney Slough to go through or come back. We could find it going out, but when we started to come home, we could never find that slough, so we'd end up on top of the reef, and we'd have to walk across the reef. She'd get on one side of the boat, and I'd get on the other, and we'd pull the boat, because it was real shallow, back up to our knees maybe, and we'd walk across that reef, and they sat in the boat and cried, wanting to go home. And we'd have to pour water on our crabs to keep them from dying. What a mess.
Oh my goodness.
And then one day I remember we were out there and we broke down. Luckily we didn't have them with us that day. And it was in the afternoon and we were way out there and our motor died and we just were floating. We didn't know what to do.
Did you have a radio or anything?
Nothing. I don't know what would ever happen to us. But we heard a boat coming out there. I don't know where they were going out there. Maybe out to the old fishing pier out there to fish. But we could hear their motor and hear them talking. And we started jumping up and down, screaming. And they heard us or saw us.
Okay.
And it was John Oakes. And they came over and pulled us in. And years later when I worked for him at the quarterdeck, he used to tell people that was the best catch he ever caught. Catching he went fishing one day and caught 2 girls.
Oh, jeez. Did you like crabbing?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
I loved it. It was so peaceful. Very peaceful out there. Early in the morning, the sound would be slick calm, no noise, and we'd get our work done, you know. We made good money. That was back then. You made good money crabbing. One time the market fell out, so Tricia and I, when Tricia and I were still crabbing, we decided
we would pick crab meat and sell it to Daddy at the restaurant. So we went to Miss Lola Gaskin's, and she showed us how to clean crabs, pick crabs. And she would cut them from knuckle to knuckle, long ways. Just like cut it right in half. The lump crab meat would be right in the middle, and you just take your knife and knock the lump crab meat out, and then all the other crab meat was in little tunnels. Take your knife and just scrape it right out.
I bet you that was some good crab meat.
Yeah, and I think Daddy paid us like $8 a pound for the lump, which was not very much, but back then it was good. But my house smelled like a crab house.
Did you ever do any other type of commercial fishing?
Yeah, Tricia and I, when the crabbing fell out, Tricia and I got gill nets and put out in the sand
And
in the wintertime.
okay, so what were you catching or trying to catch?
Probably trout and bluefish. Yeah, croakers. It was cold. We had our yellow topsider gear on. I remember one day we came back and it was cold and windy, and we had our box of fish, and we were taking it off the boat, and she was on one end of the box and I was on the other, and we stepped over to the dock, and I guess when I stepped over I kind of pushed the boat out. Tricia was shorter than I am, so she didn't make it, and I remember seeing her eyes. She had great big blue eyes, and I remember seeing her eyes huge as she's going down in the water. Cold too.
So what did you prefer, crabbing or gill netting?
Crabbing. Yeah, it was too cold drop netting. Yeah, it was fun though. I always liked seeing what we would bring up when we were pulling the net in, kind of like treasure hunting. And then one winter I went out in the ocean with David Price and Seki, drop netting. That was kind of scary because it was rough, and I remember going through the inlet, just holding on as tight as I could, and my feet coming up off the floor. That was cold. I remember wrapping up in the net coming home, trying to get warm.
Wrapping up in the net?
That was hard work too. But we had to go through that inlet, and it was always rough in the inlet, it seemed like, in the wintertime. And then one day, I don't know who was with me. I remember my friend Dee was with me. We were coming in. We had been out fishing the gill net, and it was in the early fall. But we hit something. In the old days, they would take the marlin they caught and just dump them outside the breakwater. And I think we hit a marlin, but it knocked our motor off the back of the boat, and it took the gas line with it, and so it spun around on top of the water for a minute and then sunk. So there we sat in that boat with no motor. A big old private yacht comes, pulls up, and said, "You girls got problems?" I said, "No, we just got rid of our problem." Because we were always breaking down.
Elizabeth Browning Fox reminisces about her grandfather Dick Burris and his involvement with the Boston Braves. Liz was interviewed February 12, 2014 by Sandy Jones Garrison.
My mother, Dixie Burris Browning. Her dad was Morris Lennon Burris, and his nickname was Dick. And her mother was Rebecca Stevens Burris, or Rebecca Mary Stevens, who married Dick Burris. And I think they married around in 1929. At that time, he was a professional baseball player, which it's so bizarre thinking about a professional baseball player found on Hatteras in those days. But he went off to school, and he actually he was, I think, something like a 4-letter man at NC State. And I know he played baseball. He was on the varsity baseball, football, track, and tennis teams. So he was quite the athlete. And then he had a nice career. He played well. He played for the Boston Braves and the Philadelphia Athletics and the Indiana Indians, and I can't remember the different teams because they traded him around like they do today. But his main career, where he, I think, got most of his fame, was as a left-handed first baseman for the Boston Braves.
Coastal Voices thanks the storytellers, the community oral historians, and Radio Hatteras for their support. And we thank you for joining us this evening. Good night.